Hello, and today on Meaning podcast, I am Tamir Dortal, and I'm interviewing Dave Rubin on gay marriage, about Israel and Jewish identity, about what led him from the left to the right, and what is classical liberalism all about. ולמאזיננו בעברית תעלה גרסה של הוידאו עם כתוביות מילאות בעברית בערוץ היוטיוב שלנו, ומי שרוצה לתרום לצורך הפקת הכתוביות שעולות הרבה מאוד כסף יכול לעזור באהבה. תודה רבה.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.
Hello, Dave.
Al, it's a pleasure to be with you. מה נשמע? כל בסדר?
הכל בסדר.
Good.
Actually, I've been listening to you for dozens of hours. I've been reading your excellent new book, Don't Burn This Country. And I think we have a lot to talk from the Israeli, American, conservative, liberal perspective. We have many things to discuss about.
All right. I will try to make some shawarma hummus references. Let me see what I can do here.
When was the last time you've been to Israel?
I was in Israel last time was about 5 years ago. I did a talk at Habima in Tel Aviv about new tech, and then I stayed for about 10 days. It was absolutely wonderful. Before that, I was there about 3 or 4 years before my sister. I let her marry an Israeli. My parents let her marry an Israeli. So they got
gracious.
They got married in the old city in Yafo. There's a great, it's like a castle from the Ottoman Empire. I forget Caliph, I think it's called Caliph. Do you know it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, with your American accent, I couldn't really tell if the name of the place is right.
Caliph, something like that. But it's right on the water in the old city over there, really beautiful. And then actually, I studied in Israel in 1997 when I was a junior in college. I went to Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. So I've been about 5 times, I think, total.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about something which is not so provincial. What I wanted to really ask you is what made you convert from the left to the right? And like you have been talking about the time that you have been on the left, that you've been just a liberal or a libertarian. But did you change your opinions about things, or did the left just went so to the extreme that you just had to be on the other side?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, actually. You know, I grew up in New York in an American liberal household, but not liberal in the sense of the way we use the word liberal in 2022, liberal in the way the word used to be used. I mean, John F. Kennedy Jr. used to be a Democrat and a liberal, and of course his most famous line, ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That was a liberal principle. John F. Kennedy also wanted to cut taxes. He wanted, strong defense, but he wanted to cut some defense spending. And he was a liberal. Ed Koch, who was Jewish, by the way, and a huge Israel supporter, who was mayor of New York City, he was a liberal. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who I actually met at Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, believe it or not. He came and gave a little talk there. He was my senator in New York at the time, but I met him all the way in the southern desert of Israel a long time ago. He was a liberal. But the word liberal, which at the time meant, some level of limited government, but that government can do certain basic services, individual rights, equality for all, open thought, free dialogue, all of those things. That's what liberalism used to mean. Liberalism, the way it's used, or the people who call themselves liberal in 2022 from an American perspective, are actually quite illiberal. The progressives of 2022, which I would say have completely overtaken the modern Democrat Party, they are illiberal. They are against liberalism. They're authoritarian. They believe that the government should control everything. They believe in power, and especially centralized power. So there were a few things that happened to me over the course of years that woke me up. I mean, the main one that people know about was I was doing an interview with Larry Elder, who is a conservative radio host here in America. He's been doing it for 30 years. He happens to be black, and we started talking about systemic racism, and he really sort of beat me senseless with facts. Everyone's seen it. It's been seen a million times, and, black conservative destroys libtard and the whole thing. And, what I think the good moment for me in that was, even though he clearly was better armed to be in that conversation and he had more facts on his side, I let the interview air as is. I listened to him, and then I started exploring some of those ideas. So I started talking to other people on the right, say Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Glenn Beck and a bunch of other people.
But you're really privileged because you have friends like Ben Shapiro or like Dennis Prager. You can just give them a call and ask them, I have some thoughts about this issue. Let's talk.
Well,
I'm really trying to talk to the little guy in the street and to give him advice how to convert his friends from the left, or if he's already with thoughts about liberalism, what he can do in order to learn more and in order to be solid and persuaded as someone wants to have a point of view on life.
Well, it's interesting because I would consider that a privilege now, because I'm privileged to, not only do what I want for a living and be able to invite people that, I want to talk to onto my show, and they usually say yes. But at the time, way back then, this is now 5 or 6 years ago, when I was calling Ben Shapiro or I was calling Dennis Prager or Glenn Beck or some of these other guys, we weren't friends at the time. I was inviting them on my show saying, hey, I'm down to have an open conversation with you. But it wasn't like, hey, how you doing, buddy? Let's hang out and have dinner after. It was really very different than that. But over the course of time, I think what happened was I started chatting with these people. And as I chatted with them, I had been told that they were all bigots and they were racists and they were homophobes and all the rest of the nonsense. And I started realizing, actually, that not only were they none of those things, but they had thought their positions through quite well. They were open to agreeing to disagree. And even though at the time I was still a little more on the left, I was still a little more liberal, and I don't consider myself I'm certainly not on the left anymore, and I think I have some pieces of liberalism. Unfortunately, we don't live in 1700 France.
Of liberalism.
Right. So,
liberalism, all liberalism, you mean?
Right. I mean, look, my first, even though I'm here talking about Don't Burn This Country, my first book, Don't Burn This Book, was a complete defense of classical liberalism. It is not that it is a bad set of ideas. It's that it does have a weakness, and that weakness is tolerance, and the progressives have really used that against itself. But in essence, I started chatting with these guys. I found them to be thoughtful and interesting and generous of spirit and time. And then I started going into those circles more, and I just found the people to be better and really more than anything, the ideas to be better. So that's kind of what got me here.
But were your opinions changed? I'm really going back to my question.
Yeah.
Were your opinions changed, or did the left just went completely wrong and to the extreme?
So again, it was both. I mean, I'll tell you, there are 2 or 3 things that were big that my opinions really changed on. So my opinions economically definitely changed. I am firmly in the libertarian conservative camp on low taxes, low spending. The government does not do anything well. As you probably know, I also interviewed legendary economist Thomas Sowell. And, he's been writing about this for, basically 5 decades at this point, that these big government programs do not work, especially from an American perspective. I think there's things, when we're having this conversation, I'm happy to talk about Israeli politics as well, from my position. But, in a tiny country with a mostly homogenous society, there are some ways that you can use the government to do things perhaps a little more effectively than in a giant country like America. Perhaps not, and I'd be happy to hear your opinions on that.
Actually, we have 30% Arabs, which are not really homogeneous with the Jewish majority, which is about 70%. And also in the Jewish majority, there are several groups. There is the ultra-Orthodox, which live on the welfare state, and there is the 50% or so of secular Jews who provide the high-tech and provide a startup nation and all the wealth that is needed in order to spend in a welfare state.
Right, and I know that causes a huge amount of tension between the secular and the religious, and then,
exactly.
The religious tend to vote more right, and then that creates a different set of circumstances, all of those things. And again, I'm happy to discuss any of that. But certainly from an American perspective, the idea of the welfare state, generally speaking, it simply doesn't work. It keeps people in poverty rather than lifting them out of poverty and everything else. So that is one thing. Economically, I definitely shifted right once I started really seeing the data, really understanding the issues entirely. So that was one where I shifted. In terms of the other basic ideas of liberalism, of individual rights, well, if anyone that considered themselves a liberal in 2022 believed in that, it believed in equality rather than equity, I could still call myself a liberal, but none of them do. That's not to say that there are no liberals, especially a lot of American Jews. They still think that they're liberals, except they don't realize what has happened to liberalism. It's been one of the things that I've been trying to explain to American Jews for a long time. So I would say it's a little bit of both. Some things I fundamentally changed on, but some of the principles of liberalism I now see defensible from a conservative perspective.
I've been listening to your conversation for the last few weeks since we've scheduled this interview, and one of the most interesting things you've said that I remember is that once rights are being given to the gay communities and to minorities and to everyone which were excluded back then they don't really have a reason to vote for the Democrats anymore, and now they're just individuals and they can vote for what's work the best for them as an individual, and it's of course being libertarian or being for small governments, low spending, good enforcement of the law. What do you think about your about what you said?
Well, I do agree with myself. Thank you for laying it out so cleanly. Yes, I do agree with what I said. That's the basic idea, that every society, every Western liberal democracy should fight for equality for all of its citizens. And that should be the sort of baseline thing, that if you are born in that state and you are there legally, you should be treated equally under the law. Liberalism for many decades in America fought to get everyone to equality, meaning women could not vote. And then it was liberals that fought to get women to vote. Black people were first slaves and then could not vote. It was often liberals, lefties, that were fighting for their equality, not only to not be slaves, but to be able to vote. Gay marriage, which I view obviously as a just, two adults can enter any contract that they want. It was liberals that were fighting for that. The problem is, as you just laid out, that once you get to equality, what you don't want to do is tip over into equity. Once you get to equality, so everyone's treated equally, well, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to have the exact same results. Some people are born with great skills. Some people are born with a lot of money. Some people are born poor. Some people are born with, mental defects. Some people are born in a wonderful household that's going to give them all of the right values. Some people are born to alcoholics or abusive parents. That's all of what, to use I believe it's a Yiddish word, the gestalt of life is all about, right? That's just the mix of life. But if you can set the conditions so that people are equal, then you have a chance to fight for something better. The problem is that we've shifted to this place where the people who fought for equality did not want to stop once equality was attained. There's no one that is a legal member of the United States, that is a legal citizen here, that is not equal under the law. But if you want to find problems everywhere, you will find problems everywhere, and that's what the progressive movement is about.
It's about like a never-ending struggle towards more struggles, towards more maybe protest in the streets. And I saw a kids' book in the United States when you teach children to protest. I think before you teach children to do something, you should teach them to obey, to study, to be respectful toward the other. To protest is just the opposite of those things that I think a healthy society should teach its children. Well, it's very easy to burn things down. It's very easy to destroy things. It's very hard to create things. Israel has an interesting version of this. The idea that a people who were spread across the entire globe came back to their ancestral homeland to build something in a part of the world that is not very friendly for environmental reasons and political reasons, to build something together is sort of beautiful, but it ain't easy. It was not easy to do. It's truly a modern miracle, right? It's much easier to destroy that entity than it is to build that entity, and that's why the woke and the progressives, AOC and the Squad, all of these people, they don't build anything. Black Lives Matter did not build anything. They didn't send any black people to college. They didn't build any businesses. They destroyed a lot of things. They've destroyed our universities. They've destroyed a lot of our cultural institutions. That's pretty easy to do. If I wanted to spend my days destroying things, I would be extremely busy. I like to build things. I'm extremely busy, but that's a lot harder. Actually, when I'm talking to Israelis about the right models of government and the right models of education and welfare and everything else, usually I use the classic liberals, Alexis de Tocqueville, the Federalist Papers, I use Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and all the rest of the really amazing scholars that we really are blessed by. But when they answer me, they tell me, but the situation back in America is not so good. If the American model is so amazing, so what went wrong?
Yeah.
Like you say, let's do a federal government. Let's do a really powerful cities and local governments. And let's do a charter schools in America. But nothing of those kind of policies either is working, or even Americans don't believe in it anymore. So what do you suggest?
No, I would disagree with the premise there, because it is working actually, but it's working in the places that it's being allowed to work. Florida, where I now live, where we have Ron DeSantis, who's the governor, because of the federalist system that you just described, where we have the states are supposed to be basically in charge of everything. The federal government's supposed to make sure that, we aren't being invaded, and it's supposed to make sure that the states aren't going to war with each other, but that's pretty much it. There's a few other little things. Florida is absolutely flourishing right now because of federalism, because of local governance, competency, doing budgets that make sense, not excessive spending, all of those things. California, which I lived in for 8 years before this, is an absolute free fall right now. And by the way, as we're talking right now, only last night they just decided to re-elect Gavin Newsom. He'll go into the general election, but the Democrats decided to say more of this. We want more crime. We want more drugs. We want more big budgets. We want more bad schools, et cetera, et cetera. So the federalist system and the idea of local governance, which, as you're saying, some of those thinkers, de Tocqueville and Hayek and all these people, that wanted that more local control, the idea that people on the ground could come together for a more interesting, thoughtful experiment, it really is working, but it's not working at a federal level. So I can imagine if someone is outside of America, if you only see the news of what's happening in America, and I'm guessing this is what happens all the time. It's what happens with Israel, right? We get news about Israel. Well, it's only going to be about war, right? It's never going to be about all the good things that are happening or all the innovation of all that. So you guys see a version of it, which is, look at the school shootings or this, that, or the other thing. But it's like, there's a lot of places that it's working right now. I would say Texas is working, Florida is working, Tennessee is working. The red states basically are working. It's the blue states that are not working.
What I'm saying is that the federal government is just taking more and more and more budgets and power, which means that if the federal government is taking so much money, so the local governments and the states can't really tax the citizens because they don't really have money to spend, and on the Laffer curve, they are over the top. So if they will tax more, so the people have an incentive not to work.
Yes.
And it seems something that is irreversible. I'll show you one picture. In this picture, you can see that the federal government percentage of GDP was really low back then in the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century. And then it grew and grew and grew. So what I want to ask you in this context is if we can reverse this trend, and how can we do it?
Well, there's your New Deal around 1945 or so. Well, look, here's the thing. You're making an excellent point, which is that if certain red states do everything right, so let's say I'm here in Florida and DeSantis lays out the policies, we don't have income tax here, the economy is really doing well, housing prices are very high right now because so many new people are moving in. But your point really is, well, wait a minute. If the federal government keeps doing all of the wrong things, that still can hurt the states. You're completely right. And I've discussed this with a lot of people. I don't know exactly what the answer to that question is. If the United States is going to remain the United States, if that experiment is able to continue, and we've done it for 250 years, and perhaps we're getting to a point where that experiment is starting to halt, because the problem is that the red states don't really want anything from the blue states. And, even right now, I've been on a book tour for the last 2 months, so I was bouncing around the country. So when I'm here in Florida, gas here in Florida, I don't know, it's about $4.50 a gallon. I know you guys don't do it on the gallon, but it's not too bad. It's expensive because it's expensive everywhere, but it's not too bad. You go to Los Angeles, and it's $8 or $9 a gallon, so double the price. Now, Now the problem with that is that the worse things get in California, and the more they tax their people, and the more that the people who produce move out, the more that they're going to squeeze the people that are there. So the problem is the red states, in essence, will want nothing to do with the blue states. There aren't a lot of people in Florida that want much from anybody in California. But the people in California and the people in D.C. want an awful lot from the people in Florida, meaning they want their tax revenue, that federal income tax, and they want those resources. So that's a problem that I don't know how we solved or how we're gonna solve at all, actually. I don't know how that gets resolved. I think the best thing that the states can do is consistently do everything that is right for their people and build parallel economies and hope that the federal government doesn't continue to become more and more powerful and overreach. I think that would start with getting rid of Joe Biden. I mean, hopefully these 4 years go by pretty quick and we get a sane Republican in office.
Amen. But you just said that in Florida there isn't really taxes?
We have no state income tax. So in California, I was paying something like 13% almost. I was in the highest bracket. So I have federal income tax, right? Everyone has a federal income tax from the federal government. And then on top of that, you had state income tax. I moved to Florida now. I am making way more money. I mean, considerably more money. But I will tell you, I didn't move because of money. I moved because of crime. I moved because of homelessness. I moved because of vaccine mandates and all the COVID insanity. Now getting here and seeing the tax benefits is nice. And the other interesting part of this is, California says, well, we need the income tax to keep everything running. Well, I can tell you, Florida's a hell of a lot nicer. Our roads are nicer. Our infrastructure is better. I don't see any benefit that California has other than they hire a lot more bureaucrats. That's not a benefit. I don't know of any benefit that they have by just taking more money from their citizens.
Okay, so let's move to another subject which I think you're the only one I can talk about. It's about the gay issue.
Sure.
Usually, as Douglas Murray say, gays which are in the right, they are not really gay. They just have sex like gays.
Yeah.
So really, there isn't many people to talk about gay issues. And the first question I want to ask about this issue is about surrogacy.
Yeah, we're in the middle of right now. Yeah.
You're in the middle of a process of having 2 kids through surrogacy, and surrogacy is an issue which is something that really divides conservatives and liberals as you. How do you find yourself in this issue of liberalism against conservatism and of buying someone's wound? And is it moral? I would like you to lay it out. כמה מכם פנו אליי לגבי זה שהם עשו מנוי למידע, אבל לא קיבלו קישור לעל המשמעות פלוס. אז רציתי להבהיר את הדרגות של המנויים לאתר מידע. יש לנו מנוי ב-25 שקלים, המאפשר כניסה למפגש הזום השבועי ביום חמישי בשעה 9. מי שעושה מנוי ב-60 שקלים גם מקבל גישה לעל המשמעות פלוס. פודקאסט עם מעל 200 פרקים שאתם יכולים להאזין לו דרך נגן הפודקאסטים המועדף אליכם, ומי שעושה מנוי ב-120 שקלים גם חשוף לעל המשמעות פלוס, גם נכנס למפגשי הזום השבועיים, וגם חשוף לכל התוכן פרימיום שגדי טאוב ועקיבא ביגמן מפרסמים למנויים שלהם. אז אני כמובן ממליץ על 120 שקלים, ואפילו יותר למי שיכול, כדי לעזור לנו להפיק את הפודקאסט ולהשפיע על חייהם של אלפי אנשים. תודה רבה.
Well, it's a great question. So let's remove the same-sex part of this for a second and just talk about the surrogacy part. We can talk about the other part after, but otherwise we're going to conflate 2 separate things here. So on the surrogacy part, so the simple truth is, first off, surrogacy and IVF, in vitro fertilization, this has been done for decades at this point. Same-sex couples do it. Heterosexual couples do it. Often, a man and a woman are married, and either the woman cannot bear a child or the husband's sperm is no good, might be both, could be many other reasons. The woman might be too old. So surrogacy, meaning that you bring in another woman who who is in essence, she is carrying the child for 9 months, but it is not her biological child. This has been done for a long time. So in terms of the ethical issues, well, I guess you'd have to tell me what you think the ethical issues are, but I will tell you what we did was we found an egg donor. So the egg donor is a separate woman who donates her eggs. And again, same-sex couples do this, heterosexual couples do this. We then took some of my sperm, some of my partner's sperm, we fertilized those eggs, and now we're having 2 babies. So we have 2 surrogates that are both pregnant.
And you know who's? Like, you know...
We do know. We're not telling people. We feel like it'll present itself years from now. People will figure it out on their own. But we do know. But honestly, we chose the best 2 because there's once they fertilize the egg, they can tell you the quality of the embryo. Some of them are very strong and healthy. Some of them aren't. We happened to choose the 2 that were healthiest. That was what we were just trying to do. So I understand that there are ethical issues in it. Some people say, well, you shouldn't be able to pay a woman to, bear that pregnancy for 9 months. I can tell you this, that having interviewed multiple surrogates, the surrogates that do this, they're not doing it for money. First off, you make a decent amount of money. It depends where you are, but it's not some extraordinary, crazy amount of money. But you do make some money. The women that do this often say that it's a calling from God. That's what most of them say. They say that they feel for couples, regardless of sexuality, that they cannot have a child. They view it as a blessing. Every surrogate, by the way, at least in America, you have to already have your own children. So they usually say, well, I had my own children, I had my own family. A lot of them had a girlfriend or a male friend who couldn't have a child for whatever reason, and they realized this was something that they could do. And they really, the word that they often say is they view it as a blessing. So there's no coercion here. No one is forced into doing it or anything like that. I understand that people have some uncomfortabilities with it, and I accept that, actually. And I'm happy to hear any of your thoughts on that. But I don't find that there's major moral issues with it personally.
I really like Jonathan Haidt, a book about this issue, because he says that liberals, leftists, only view the moral issues from this coercion or consent point of view.
Right.
And usually conservatives have things that they wouldn't do even if the partner have consented. Let's say some student which is studying medical profession at the university, and she just after she finished doing a surgery for a body, for a study of being a doctor, she wants to eat it, So a leftist would say, she didn't consent, like the body didn't consent, so you shouldn't eat the body.
Yeah.
But a conservative would say, no, you don't eat bodies, it's wrong.
Right.
So what is your thoughts about it? Like, do you have more perspective other than consent about this issue?
It's a great point. I know Height's, you're talking about not the blank slate. What's the book? The
Righteous Mind.
The Righteous Mind is one, but I think there was also the blank slate, if I'm not mistaken, Jonathan Haidt. We'll get it in a sec. Doesn't matter.
I meant the Righteous Mind.
You were talking about the Righteous Mind. Okay. Well, in any event, right. So there's this issue about coercion versus sort of personal morality, right? And this is where, a libertarian, if you were taking the purely libertarian position, you want no coercion over anyone whatsoever. If you have a personal morality that either comes from a religious morality or a biblical morality, something like that, then you could have some sort of issue with this. My feeling after we went through this entire process and talked about adoption, we talked about what the alternatives were. Look, I also understand that there's a moral issue around that the sort of root of the Western civilization, I believe, is the individual first, and then from that is a family, and then from that is a local community, and then we can move our way up. A family generally is a father and a mother and then children. That is the norm. That is the norm, and I would say in some ways this is going to sound a little bit weird for a certain amount of people, but that is sort of the ideal. But in the world, not everything is always the ideal. So in the family that we are going to raise, we're obviously going to have 2 fathers. However, that is not me saying, women are not important or that there is no difference between men and women or anything like that. So we are going to have a lot of very strong role models, female role models. David's mom is going to live with us for a couple months. His sister was a nanny for young children. She's going to move in with us. My sister, who married an Israeli years ago, lives in Miami. She's due with her third baby, and she lives a few miles away from us. So we're going to have a lot of women around us at the same time. And it will it look different than the traditional family? Yes. But how many people do the traditional family truly right, with the best of the mother and the father, and don't do anything to screw up their kids psychologically or physically or anything else? So I think you can say that, there is the norm and the ideal, and then there are things around that and approximate to it that are pretty good too. And the best that I can do is do the best that I can to make something good happen.
So basically what I hear from your things right now is that on the ideal, you would prefer that your children will be heterosexual and to live in the classic ideal family, men and women.
Well, I wouldn't prefer, that's not exactly what I'm saying. I don't know that I would prefer that they would be. I would prefer that I am able to raise two children who are functional adults who have an understanding of the way the world works and can find some meaning in their lives and live a life that's important to them. If ultimately they both turn out to be straight, that's fantastic. If one of them turns out to be gay, that's fine too. Like that, it's sort of...
No, but I mean on the ideal, not...
Yeah.
If it would happen, you would embrace them if they were gay, of course.
Yeah.
But this is not the question. The question is, what do you think the ideal that you would want your children to be?
I guess we're getting hung up maybe a little bit on the word want. I would understand in the reality of reality is that life would be sort of the easiest, supposedly, although I don't think life is necessarily supposed to be easy, if they happen to be heterosexual and then they just sort of fit into the mold that has been the mold for so long. That would probably be easier, but to fully say that would be something that I would prefer would be a dismissal of my own life in a way, right? Because I've built a life that is meaningful. I've built a life that I think is pretty decent and pretty good and everything else. So I will be no happier. Let's put it this way: if my child came to me and said they were gay, I wouldn't be happier than if they told me they were straight. You know what I mean? Like it would just be: did I raise a child that I think I gave the right tools, hopefully, to go out into the world and figure out what they want to be and how they want to interact with the world?
הרבה מכם שאלתם אותי לגבי מעשר כספים וגם לגבי סעיף 46. אנחנו כרגע עובדים על סעיף 46, אבל הדבר היותר מעניין זה ששאלתי את הרב שרקי לגבי מעשר כספים, והוא אמר לי שכמובן אפשר לתרום חלק ממעשר הכספים לפודקאסט על המשמעות. אז מי שזה מעניין אותו ומי שרוצה לתמוך בעשייה הציבורית שלנו, מוזמן לתמוך גם במעשר כספים או לשאול את הרב שלכם. וואו. Okay, let's talk a bit about the Jewish perspective. What is Judaism for you? Like, I was in America, in Los Angeles last summer, and the assimilation rate. I think that in 100 years we won't have any Reform Jews or almost any conservative Jews. There will be, I think, only Orthodox, and we're in a really big assimilation problem that has never been in the Jewish history, and it's really something that happens in the United States in a more radical way.
Yeah. Well, the story of America is about assimilation, right? It's the story of people coming from every corner of the earth, bringing their traditions, their religions, their foods, their senses of humor, their music, all of those things, and then assimilating into the fabric of America, becoming part of the melting pot that is America. That's a beautiful thing, and I think the assimilation part of it has worked for almost everyone in America in extraordinary ways. So whether you came here, so my ancestors that came from Poland and some from Holland, and a few other countries assimilated. They came with nothing. It's the standard American Jewish story of my great-grandfather lived in one bedroom with 6 other children. With my grandmother, his father died when he was literally 1 year old. They had to move into a smaller apartment further into the boroughs. But then he eventually sort of became lower middle class. My dad eventually became middle class into upper middle class. I'm obviously doing well. So my family's story is that great American tale. And there are many stories of that, regardless of whether you're Jewish or Italian or Irish or from the West Indies or wherever you're from. The assimilation thing related to the Jews is particularly odd and interesting because, with the 4,000 or 5,000 year history that we got, we're not supposed to be here at this point, right? I mean, if you look at what do we do at every holiday? Oh man, a lot of people tried to kill us. God did a little something at the end and here we are. Okay, let's eat. And that story, though, there are many societies that don't exist anymore. There are many ethnicities that don't really exist anymore. Even if you look at the Native American life in America, which is only, it was obviously existed for thousands of years, but, in essence, America has existed for 250 years. Native Americans have extremely high rates of alcoholism. Their communities have been decimated in so many ways. But somehow Jews, through pogroms and holocausts and inquisitions and all of these things, somehow stuck together. Something kept going there.
So what went wrong? What happened to us?
So the question is, what did the American assimilation really do that maybe is unique to America, that was good, that maybe is not so great at some level now? I think that for most Jews, they look, you also have to remember, I know I'm speaking to the choir on this, the Holocaust did such damage sort of psychologically, mass psychologically, and I grew up around Holocaust survivors, I'm guessing that you did as well, that it did such mass damage that a huge amount of people just wanted to assimilate over everything else, give up everything that, their grandparents thought and their grandparents thought and their grandparents thought. And I think we all kind of, in a modern sense, we all kind of struggle with this between modernity and tradition and all of those things. I think basically American Jews kind of traded it all in for some version of, I eat bagels and lox and I've seen every episode of Seinfeld 20 times and that kind of is enough. So I think you're right. Probably in 50 years, it'll mostly be, there'll be an Israeli version of Judaism that will still exist and there'll be an Orthodox version, but there won't be a lot of American sort of secular Jews. All the comedians of the 80s, every comedian was a Jew. That thing kind of won't exist anymore, which is sad in a lot of ways. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe there's some other things going on there. But I will tell you this, I didn't have a great affinity for a lot of the Jews also traded in all of the tradition and everything else for a different religion. They traded in for the religion of leftism, which is why when I was in Los Angeles, and this is something Dennis Prager has talked about a long time. I was good friends with Dennis Prager and some of his friends there, but most of my Jewish friends actually were Israelis. There's obviously a lot of Israelis. They come, they build, they usually are home builders or they're in construction or something like that. And most of my Israeli friends were Sephardic, Iraqi, Moroccan Israelis. I felt very comfortable in that community more than I did with a lot of the secular Jews of Los Angeles, believe it or not.
Actually, my brother lives in California, and he's also in the building and construction
Surprise,
business.
surprise. He probably built me a bathroom or something.
Yeah, but actually what makes me really sad is that Israelis assimilate in the highest rate. Only 1 of 20 of the kids of Israelis marry a Jew and not a non-Jew. So, as a Jew, what do? You live in America in order to pass the conservative traditions and values of your Jewish heritage to the next generation.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that you can do is partly what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is in some degree fight for sanity and fight for not a purely secular world. The reason that everyone's so crazy about politics is because people think politics is meaning. They think that is the thing. And once you accept that there is a rich history behind you, whether your religion is Judaism or Christianity or whatever it might be, if you understand that there's an awful lot of people who fought for an awful lot of things with blood, sweat, and tears before you, it will humble you in a way, and it will allow you to not, I don't wake up, look, I could wake up every day and I could look at my phone and boy, every day some idiotic thing happened and some crazy political thing happened. And if that is if that's the sum totality of your world, you're going to be miserable and you're going to be crazy and you're going to be neurotic and you're going to have psychological problems, all of the things that we see with modernity. But if you step back a little bit and you say, boy, there's a story that is unfolding here, that has been unfolding for an awful long time. There are stories that were told a long time before us that have some meaning. Why do I believe that David beat Goliath? Well, why do I believe the little guy can beat the big guy? It has something to do with the story of David versus Goliath. So whether the story is literally true or it is a metaphor for something else, that you as the individual can beat the machine, it's so intrinsically true to me. It is so obviously true that I try to live it my own way. So, when I fight big tech, and I started a tech company with my brother-in-law who's Israeli, we started Locals because we wanted to fight big tech. Well, it's not just easy to fight big tech, but I believe David can beat Goliath. So if David can beat Goliath, then maybe Dave can beat Google.
So Judaism basically, as you say, is values or inspiring stories that really can contribute to you, and you really don't want that your politics will be your identity and your belief and your religion. As Yaakov Talmon. Do you know Yaakov Talmon?
I don't, but it sounds like I would like him.
No, you would. He wrote a book that his name in, I would try to translate, The Beginning of the Totalitarian Democracy. It's a book about how
I think we're there.
The left... Yeah, it's from the 1950s. So this book describes how the Rousseau and Robespierre and all the good friends from the French Revolution made their politics as a religion and made it their identity. And I think that it is contributes to misery and to neuroticism. But what I want to ask about the Jewish issue is, you wrote on your last book, Don't Burn This Book, that liberalism might not be enough, in the sense that you should have another set of values. And this set of values should be as rich as possible. And in America, the majority is a Christian, and it's really, I wouldn't say easy, but it's much more easy to be a Christian conservative than being a Jewish conservative. The Jewish education costs a fortune. It's really hard not to assimilate culturally and friends-wise and work-wise. And how do you do it? How do you suggest to the general population, either Christian or Jewish, that liberalism isn't enough, so what should you do?
Well, it's sort of what we were talking about before, that if you're just going to accept that liberalism or just politics is enough, you're just not going to be happy. At the end, you will not be happy. It's why progressives are always screaming about everything. It's why they're angry about everything. It's why they try to cancel people, because they want to control the world. That they believe they have so lost what it is to be human in a certain sense. They believe that they can create a structure, that man can create a structure better than man. It's just not right. Our founders actually had the right idea, which is that you have God-given rights. Now, we can talk about God and meaning and all of those things, but you have God-given rights. These are inalienable rights that exist, and all the government is doing is protecting those rights. That's a really, really beautiful thing, which is why I think that the founders created really some of the best man-made documents. If we want to say that the Bible is God-made, then the founding of the United States, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, are the best man-made documents in recorded history because they have freed more people than any other document known to man. Once you accept that you are born free, once you accept that you're born flawed, once you accept that you can't control the world, I think you can open yourself up to a very rich life. But it's a lot easier, I suppose, to demand that the world bow to you. And that's also, by the way, to get back to something that we talked about earlier, it's why these people are always trying to destroy things, because they think that they're entitled to a certain something. And that's sort of the funny part. You've got these social justice warriors who are 18 years old in the United States screaming about how oppressed they are. And if they had any humility, if they had any sense of history, they wouldn't have to look back on history of 200 years ago or 500 years ago. They'd only have to talk to their grandparents and ask them what it was like. My two grandfathers who had to fight in World War II. I have no doubt that your grandparents either fought in the War for Independence or in the Six-Day War or something. That if you just had a little humility and said, boy, it doesn't mean America of 2022 is perfect or that Israel of 2022 is perfect or anything, but they're pretty freaking good relative to the rest of the world. And if you say, oh, maybe I could put a little effort into perhaps more perfecting the union, as we would say from an American perspective, then I think you'd probably be a lot happier.
What do you think caused the American education to be so woke? Like in Israel, we don't even have dozen of private schools, not high school and not for kindergarten. All the school system and all the education system, all the universities are public. Like it's the dream of the wokeness, Israel, because everything is public.
Well, again, this is where, because of the size of Israel, even though you have the split between, let's say, the Jewish population and the Arab population, and by the way, the Arab population in Israel has it way better than in most Arab countries, which is why they don't leave. Nobody's keeping them there, but they don't leave.
In any Arab country.
The Arab Israelis, who, as you said, are 30% of the population, who have a party that's in the Knesset right now, they could leave. They don't leave. They have more voting rights in Israel than any other country. Okay, fine. So what happened? But the thing is, from a size perspective, when you say things are public in Israel, Israel is the size of New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the 4, I think, smallest states in the United States. So the size thing, and then the relative cultural identity, that even if Israel's cultural identity is split between, say, religious and conservative or Ashkenazi and Sephardic and Arab and Jewish or whatever, there's a general cohesive idea of what's going on there. I get why it's very frayed and you put 3 Jews at a table and you have 4 opinions and okay, fine. Yeah. But from an American perspective, the thing is so freaking big and it's just simply not working anymore. The idea that the Department of Education, which is a federal institution, that it should be able to tell every kid and every parent, whether you live in rural Kentucky or in urban Boston, that you're supposed to learn exactly the same things and the cultural norms have to be exactly the same. It's just crazy, and it's obviously not working.
But what I'm asking is, how come even in the private schools things are corrupted? How come you have like a transgender telling stories to young kids in kindergarten if it's a private kindergarten?
So this is where you have to, as my friend Jordan Peterson would say, you have to give the devil his due. The woke parasite, and I would view it as a parasite, as another friend of mine, Gad says, it is a parasite that has infested these institutions. And liberal institutions, generally speaking, have not had good defenses against it. So basically, if you were to take all of the sort of relatively secular Jewish schools in Los Angeles, they're all infected. Actually, there's my numbers could be slightly off here, but there's a Catholic school in Los Angeles. It's one of the biggest Catholic schools in Los Angeles. It's called Campbell Hall. And it's something like 40% Jewish now, because the sane Jewish parents are getting their kids out of the Jewish schools because they've gone so woke, and they'd rather send their kids to a Catholic school rather than going to a woke school. So the liberal institutions have no defense against this. The religious institutions generally have a better defense, but sometimes they don't either.
I would really want you to offer our listeners some reading materials that they can read, except of course of your last 2 books, in order really to grasp what's happening in politics or in American history or in whatever subject that you want, because I think that really people who read books really want good books to read, and there are so many books out there that you really need someone to give you a recommendation.
So a good one, because it's somewhat quick, and I'm sure it's been translated into Hebrew, but even if not, the English won't be too hard. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. It's
amazing.
It's I don't know. Yeah. It's 70. You have it behind you probably. It's 75 pages or something. You got a copy right over there. It's funny, I got you on.
This is the Hebrew version.
Oh, there you go.
Actually, I called my podcast On Meaning after John Stuart Mill's book.
Well, there you go. So that's a very easy one. I would say, I can give you just a few of the books that have had meaning to me over the years that are connected to what I do. I mean, I would say 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson in terms of... You've got your digital background on right now, so I can't... I can't. Is that in Hebrew or in English?
It's in Hebrew. The Tikva Fund really did a great job translating a lot of the classic liberal literature into Hebrew.
When I was on tour with Jordan, the plan was to go to Israel, and then unfortunately his health failed, and then COVID and everything else, but I know he really wants to visit. So I would say 12 Rules because it's just a great blend of everything that we've talked about here, because it's the constant battle between order and chaos that we're all dealing with inside of ourselves, which is the ultimate battle for meaning and everything else. I'll give you one or two more. One that I think Israelis would find particularly good. My friend Peter Thiel wrote 0 to 1, which is an incredible book perfect for Startup Nation, about creating new ideas and that the next Facebook will not be Facebook. It's going to be something drastically different, really, truly innovate. And that's also sort of like On Liberty. It's kind of a short book. And I'll give you one other, which is a guy that, unfortunately, he passed away before I was an interviewer, but I would have loved to interview Carl Sagan, who was the astronomer and science communicator. He wrote many books. His most famous book was Cosmos, which was then a TV series. But his last book was called Billions and Billions. And he actually passed...
Billions and billions.
Billions and billions. That was his catchphrase. And actually, it's funny because he says at the beginning of the book, everyone thought that his catchphrase was billions and billions because they used to do a thing on Saturday Night Live where he would say billions and billions. But he actually never said it on The Tonight Show. It just became a meme unto itself before we had memes. But anyway, it was his last book. He also, by the way, he wrote his only fiction book was the movie Contact, which is an absolutely wonderful book, wonderful movie. It was a wonderful book and a wonderful movie. That's about a lot of the issues we're talking about right now. But it's his last book. He actually died right before the ending of the book. So the end of the book is written by his wife, who was also a professor at Cornell. But he was an incredible communicator of scientific ideas for regular people. And it's a really, really wonderful book.
So I really wanted to thank you. I've been listening to you for hundreds of hours for the last time. And I want to do it on air. I want to really say thank you to Yehuda Siegel, which have arranged this meeting between us. I have many listeners, and some of them are donating from their time and from their skills in order for my podcast to work. And I think that they should be awarded right here, right now. And so I wanted to thank you, Dave, and I wish you would come to Israel as soon as possible and we can meet in person.
Well, can I come in? I'm unvaxxed. Can I come in?
You can come in. We let everybody in because Bennett, our Prime Minister, have let everything like in Florida. So you're more than welcome.
All right. Well, last time I was there, I was at a great wine bar at the old train station in Tel Aviv. I will meet you there.
Okay. Fine.
All right, it was a pleasure. Thanks.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.